So I think we were thinking that we would introduce briefly who we are and then just chat with everybody about the different research areas. Does that seem good?
Okay, very good. I will start. So my name is François Gambretier, and I do technical HCIs, and part of it is in the field of human-robot interaction. I started with work on interactive 3D printing, where we design a 3D printer which is interactive, so you can design at the same time as the system is, the model is printed. Lately, I've been working a lot into embodiment to support design, so that design is very specific for the require for remote collaboration, because in general you have artifacts, you have a large desk or maybe a large room. So we are doing robots which are controlled by body scanning, so that people don't have to think about the robot and they kind of interact and focus on their task.
Hi, I'm Keith Green, and I think about the room as a robot. So that might be the walls, the ceiling, the floors, the furniture, multiple devices in the room, anything that we might think about that would make, you could say, human-machine interaction spatial, so that it's beyond having an object that is our size or say smaller that we commandeer. So it becomes a kind of an interesting HCI in that what we're interacting with is something that's around us or enveloping us. And so we develop robots that tend to be compliant because they're in intimate spaces with us. So they might be pneumatic, McKibben actuated, or maybe with tendons, much like a marionette, steel cable, say. Or now we're moving more into soft robots as well. And so we're trying to think about how we live intimately in a machine that we live in.
And Angelique is here.
Everyone, good morning. Yeah, so my research is also in robotics, and so I specifically focus on human-robot interaction. And so a lot of my work involves, how can we enable a robot to work in teams or groups of people? And a lot of it has been within the application space of healthcare, but I'm also interested in other application spaces. But what I'm really interested in is looking at how we can model the environment for robots so that they can work in teams with multiple people at once. So that might include doing some computer vision. So how does a robot perceive its teammates? How does it detect them and track them over time in the same environment? How does the robot model collaboration and use that as a cue of how to collaborate better? So a lot of my work is kind of focused on multi-party interaction. And so there's also folks here who have similar interests, like Malte also looks at groups in HRI. And so yeah, a lot of my work is focused on particularly the healthcare space. And so in my PhD, I really focused on clinical teams and how robots can support them. And so at Cornell, I'll be working on developing those systems more in detail and looking at how robots can support healthcare workers in safety critical environments. But yeah, so that's my research.
So my background is a little different. I started in psychology, and now I study essentially sort of behavioral science approaches to information science. So we do a lot of studies of people using existing technology, and then we work with other sorts of people, like Francois and I collaborate on a grant where the other people are doing the building or things like that, or we have master students and so forth. But our focus is kind of on collaborative processes and new interventions that we could build for that are pretty simple. And so we look at that in a lot of different spaces. So right now we're looking at fake news. We do a lot on tools for intercultural and multilingual kind of communication and things for, pro ecology, help people save energy and things like that. And then we have intersections with other groups over topics like human robot interaction, where Malta, who I think is giving a talk at a conference right now and not here, but you know, we have collaborations across multiples of us in this group. So people can see things from different perspectives, I guess, is what I think is really interesting. Like you can tackle a problem from these different perspectives, right? I guess I would say this is a very tight research area, right? The people are close with each other. There's a lot of collaborations, a lot of opportunity to work with multiple people in this area and so forth, and across both campuses. Yeah.
And add also that, in fact, we have many of the leaders in this field. So we have a very strong set of faculty if you are interested in HCI, in HRI. So.
Yeah, Malta always likes to say that we have the largest also HRI group.
Yeah.
Yes, we beat out Carnegie Mellon, which used to have the largest. Yeah. Yeah. So, and this continues to grow. You know, now we have a area like so it's not quite a field, but you know, of robotics that includes many different aspects of robotics that people can be involved in, take the courses in, and so forth. And I guess we didn't mention, but there's also, you know, a big initiative on human AI interaction that encompasses human robot interaction, but other kinds of AI that a lot of people are involved in, that brings people from all sorts of departments together on campus.
And also I mean, there's a lot of circles that sort of overlap, right? So there's also the robotics at Cornell. Is that what we call it?
Yeah.
Francois, but
Yeah.
there's the larger group that cuts across, you know, at least 3 colleges and 4 or 5 departments, maybe, which is definitely kind of an umbrella, right? Expanding beyond any particular department or program. And that group works closely together.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
May I ask, so I can tell that, again, this is a very collaborative environment, and I love that. But how do these collaborations form? So do you have moments where people can talk about their research and potentially develop collaborations? So what are sort of the networking moments that you have that allow us to understand who we could collaborate with?
Mm-hmm.
That's a good question. So Malta, who is not here, and I share a lab, so we just kind of talk, and Francois is by a lot, and you know, it's kind of informal, right? I mean, would the other faculty agree? Keith is over in our building, but we don't visit him enough over in his space.
Right, but we have a robotic seminar every week.
Yeah.
And probably, I don't know, 40% of the talks are in the area of HRI that people, I think, in IS would be interested in. Lots of speakers coming to campus, but I think students put us together. You know, we know each other, but sometimes it's better to let the students drive the collaboration as opposed to, like, so Francois and I know each other, but a student put us together and said, I'd like Francois to be on this committee. And then we moved from there. Malta's been on my committees, soon not yet, but so we've been on each other's committees for supervising students, and that tends to be student driven. We do nudge, I mean, I nudge people towards Francois, say, in his courses. I have a list of, for my lab, of courses I might suggest. And so people sort of wander over and find him. And if that seems right, that course feels right, then somehow all of a sudden Francois might be invited by the student, really, to have that membership on the committee. So
yeah, so I think that sort of relates to what we were talking about in the program review about you form a committee early, and so those, you know, collaborations just happen out of that, you know. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
interesting.
because I think it's really some a la carte is that you pick the people that you think will help you in your research. And so that I think the most important, because that's really how we can all explore new area that maybe we will not we will consider before.
Yeah, so that's a great point too. So, and also, people have, we collaborate out with these other areas, like I mentioned earlier, the law school. Like, I wouldn't have really thought, well, let me go talk to somebody in the law school, but a student wanted to do information science as applied to law. And then these new collaborations will start in that way.
I have one quick question. Aside from basically reaching out to faculty directly to get exposure to the topics, are there venues in the information department that could expose students to these topics that are like at the department level that span all the areas? I'm aware of, like, for instance, in the NLP parts, there's like a lot of reading groups, but it's pretty focused on anything related to NLP. I'm curious about, as you said, things that are more broad.
I don't know if there is a reading group. I mean, in general, these reading group are in fact student-led.
Yeah.
So that we don't, maybe there is a reading group. I think the main, when you discuss with your advisor, any of us, we know about what the other people are doing, and we will certainly help you with that. I think as was mentioned before, we have a seminar in robotics, which I think is also a great occasion to kind of see what people are doing.
So yeah, I was just saying, if you're thinking about like collaborations, how do you meet different faculty? How do you bridge different faculty? So for me, I actually was accepted by Karen Levy, who's a faculty in IS, and Natalie Bazarovo is a faculty in communication. And I'm the first student they've ever co-advised and the first time they worked together. So sometimes you make that connection just by existing as a person. I've also posted a couple of other activities. There's a lot of talks that happen at Cornell, like a lot. There's faculty colloquium where you will see people like Sue and Francois and Keith talk regularly and Angelique. And then there's student colloquiums, which I think are great, hosted by the Graduate Student Association. So you'll get to see the first year student talks, the later year student talks to our dissertation level. There's Digital Life Initiative, which was one of my favorite things earlier on, especially during the pandemic when it was accessible. So you can see guest invited speakers, but also postdocs who are even further along than our current graduate students. So there's really an endless amount of opportunities, more than can usually fill your calendar, to get exposure to these places. And I highly recommend just leaning into your interest when you're picking classes. And a lot of those faculty turn out, like I took a networks class with Drew Margolin. He is now my minor member. Like that's, sometimes those things also just happen.
Hi, I want to ask if it is probable that you will need to hire students during the summer to collaborate in your research.
So that's really a discussion between, because sometimes students prefer to go in the research lab or with other labs to expand their their potential letter writer, for example.
Yeah.
So it's really depend. It's something, a discussion you have your advisor to figure out which one is the best for you, either stay during the summer or go to a lab.
Our students, they have good results trying to get internships, I think.
Yeah.
It's an area of internships that's pretty highly desired and things like that. So, but, we try to do our best to make sure everybody's funded in a way that they like in the summer. Keith, do your students mainly do internships or?
No, they're mostly here working. Sometimes they'll take, I had one on an NSF fellowship. She's in mechanical engineering, but she's practically doing information science, child-robot interaction. And she was permitted basically under that policy of funding to go to Colorado to work more directly in industry for just a few weeks. And I feel that that was a great thing to do. I mean, she came back recharged, as opposed to just continuing to work and work. But the summers are nice. I mean, it's a lovely place. Ithaca in the summer, the weather's nice. It's more relaxed. And, you know, I know with my group, we go sometimes to the terrace under the Statler Hotel and have lunch and sit at one of those big round tables. And we have undergrads who I usually, you know, hardly see in my lab running in and out, and masters and PhD students. And we actually get to talk, right?
Yeah.
Like, has anyone read a good book lately? Or did you see that outdoor concert, right? So it's kind of a different, it allows us to sort of relax a little bit and get to know each other and think a little bit bigger than when we're kind of caught up with the 9-month academic year. So, so the summers are nice. And, you know, it's an opportunity too to roam around campus and meet some of the others of us and just sort of like, oh, you know, they might wander down and spend a little time in Gates Hall and see what's happening, or, yeah. So summers are nice here. It's just a change of pace and without that sort of intensity, right? At least my experience.
Yeah, and to answer your question, Ruth, yeah, so there are opportunities to work with undergrads over the summer. They have like REU programs where we can recruit students. I know at UCSD we had DREU. I don't know if Cornell actually has that, but that's another opportunity potentially to work with students over the summer. And so if you're looking to kind of mentor students, if that's what you're getting at, typically that's done throughout the school year. So it really depends on the faculty if they're recruiting undergrads for the summer in particular. So it's kind of probably done on a faculty by faculty basis.
So we have a question in the chat. I would say that my students have been successful. Yeah, I think, does anyone know the answer for Cornell Tech, whether students are generally successful? I think so. In getting summer funding? I think so. I mean, we try to make sure everybody has summer funding, and I think I would hear about it if lots of people didn't have summer funding. There's many opportunities in New York in the summer though, right? A lot more opportunities than would be here in Ithaca. So Ithaca students often wander off.
Yeah, I think for Cornell Tech, what I've heard is that typically they work with undergrads remotely from the main campus. And so that's an opportunity for the undergrads as well to get involved with research at Tech in New York City.
Yeah, so I may have misunderstood the original question. And yeah, my lab has tons and tons of undergrads in the summer, and there's lots of opportunity to work with them. Yeah. More questions?
Keith, you mentioned talking about good books. I guess this is the question for everybody. Any books you'd recommend we read before we join the program?
Oh, wow. It's so hard to know when we don't know each other, right? So if I throw you a book, you'll say, oh, it's not for me. But I think each of us would answer a little differently. I would say read so that you're thinking outside boxes, right? Like Tom Friedman of the New York Times says, you know, not outside the box, without boxes. So I think just reading, sometimes we read short stories and come up with brilliant ideas about our research, or we read in another field, right? So I think reading is good. I think just exposing yourself to everything outside of Gates Hall or Cornell and just, right, engaging, embracing the world, right? And just maintaining a kind of curiosity is the best thing. I come up with some of the best ideas. I don't know how people feel, but when I'm not in my lab, right? When you're outside of it, all those, the way the brain works, right? I mean, then it's embodied. So we're moving around and somehow just kind of letting yourself live, right? And I think giving yourself a little latitude to go outside. You know, I like, you know, Bruce Mao, the graphic designer, Francois probably knows Bruce Mao, right? Wrote this, I think it's like 43 points for a manifesto in design. And he always, it's marvelous. They're just ideas that we know, like start anywhere. He says, when you're doing a project, start anywhere. Or, you know, the kind of epiphanies will come to you when you're least expecting them, when you're doing something else, right? So, but maybe Sue, Francois, Angelique, what's your advice? I'm giving
I think taking a break before grad school, between
Yeah.
undergrad and grad school, is my recommendation.
yeah.
Yeah,
Trust me,
that
when
is
you're
always
on
my
campus,
recommendation.
You are
too.
going to work hard. And I think instead of trying to work beforehand, I will just, take a break. And, it doesn't have to be, travel across the world. It can just be, wherever you like to be, just relax, recharge, and come refresh in September.
Yeah, so,
Hopefully August.
oh, yes, August, right.
August, sorry,
End of
August.
Yeah.
It has to be August.
Yeah, I really, that's the answer that I've been giving people as well if they ask me about academic stuff to do to prepare, because there's nothing you need to do to prepare, right? You just need to relax and be ready for a pretty intense 5 years. You could read, fiction books that, they could or could not be related. I've been rereading Margaret Atwood's books recently, just for whatever, stuck at home, for all this time. And you never know when some idea in that book will actually pertain to us, like the work we do. You just never know, but it's also entertaining, and I do it not for work,
Yeah, I remember I asked this very same question before I started my PhD, and the advice I was given was to read this SPSS book by Andy Field, which some people find kind of controversial, but I think is kind of hilarious. But yeah, I read that book before I started my PhD. I don't know if I would recommend that you guys read that, just because, if you're doing behavioral research, it's good to know about statistical methods, right? That's always good to know. But if you're not going to be doing a lot of statistical analysis in your research, then there's no point in you reading that book. So. Yeah, I just thought that would be kind of funny to mention because it's kind of controversial, that book.
But also that seems like a really tedious way to, unless you found it really exciting, but I don't know. It's just a way to prepare for grad school. I don't know. You can always read it later, right?
That really got me through it.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know.
Awesome, thank you. I think it's awesome that you guys are really encouraging people to take that time for mental health. It's, the PhD is long, so I think that's great that you're doing that.
Welcome. I think people are still starting to join, but I don't want to spend too much time waiting for folks because I know we don't have very long to talk with you, and we want to get the chance to let you ask questions and to tell you a little bit about ourselves. So just to let you know how the session is going to go. The faculty are going to introduce themselves and tell you a very short little bit about their work. And then I have a couple of questions up my sleeve to ask ourselves that you might be interested in. However, you know better than me what questions you're interested in. So feel free at any point to either raise your hand or to put questions in the chat. And we're really looking forward to this chance to talk with you guys a little bit more. So faculty currently present at this meeting are me, Phoebe Sengers, Gilly Vidon. I see Nathan Matthias is here. It might be that a few others. Oh, and I see Helen. Great. So, no worries. We're just getting started, Ellen. So now we're going to go through and give everyone a chance to do intros. And Gilly, you've got slides, so I'll let you go first.
Thank you so much, Phoebe, and welcome everyone. It's nice to see both colleagues and some familiar faces from our own PhD students already, as well as all of you admits. So let me. There we go. I want to talk to you today a little bit about my work as a historian of technology and SDS scholar in the information science department, thinking about questions of trust and the politics of technology historically. And I'm going to do that by talking a little bit about a new project that I'm starting with a colleague in the SDS department, as well as a few graduate students here, about the idea of rethinking the specter of the fake in digital technology. So the sort of idea that the internet or the experience of digital media has become one of sifting through potentially fake content is kind of pervasive in our culture. The way that I am trying to think about some of these questions is through unpacking the narrative of the digital dissolve, which suggested that we had this material, physical world of certainty that is now being dissolved into the digital. And I'm trying to find some historical examples of this nexus between the analog and the digital to upend some of these assumptions that are embedded in the digital dissolved narrative, such as the idea that the material is fading into the digital, that there is a disruption or a loss of control. And very important to my own work on the role of the state is a rollback of state capacity in governing. This, lost my window, second. These questions about sort of fakeness and what digital technology is doing to our sense of trust and authenticity in digital media are at the core of my training as an SDS scholar. Questions about knowledge and questions about democracy and technocracy and the tension between the two. How do we have experts that know on our behalf to the same extent that we have sort of governors who politicians who govern on our behalf. So these are all kind of questions of representation that I am deeply interested in exploring through this entry point of thinking about the digital fake. So this term, together with Malte Zewitz, who's a colleague in the Science and Technology Studies Department, thank you, Phoebe, in the SDS department, and a few graduate students here in the Information Science Department, we started the Fake Lab, which stands for Fidelity, Authenticity, and Knowability in Electronic Media, where we are trying to grapple with some of these questions. So not so much studying quantitatively the phenomenon of fakes, but trying to use interpretive social science tools to understand what productive knowledge-generating activities might be associated with the specter of the fake. One of the case studies that I'm particularly interested in is the development over the last 3 or 4 decades of counterfeit deterrence systems, which were embedded in all kinds of visual editing software in the early 2000s, trying to prevent people from being able to edit images of banknotes. So this is just an example for some of these historical pop-ups that users of Photoshop in the early 2000s might have encountered. And with that, I'll sort of conclude. This is supposed to be a bit of a taste of the kind of work that we are now doing at the Fake Lab, and I look forward to hearing your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Gilly. I'm going to go through and allow all the faculty to introduce themselves, and then we'll go into questions. And so you can ask questions about specific faculty members, research, or more general questions you have about the program. So Helen, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. It's also fantastic hearing from all of our colleagues and a great opportunity to update and refresh on what everybody's doing. Helen Nissenbaum. I sit in the Cornell Tech New York City campus, and I'm the director of the Digital Life Initiative, which in a way the byline for that captures my own work: ethics, politics, quality of life. And I'm trained as a philosopher, and a lot of the work I do is inspired by ethics, politics, quality of life. The kind of projects that I work on generally is often inspired by the people who are around me, and they may have to do with privacy in many different dimensions, and also something that I think knits many of our faculty together, the idea that human values, ethical values, political values are embedded very much into the technical design. And so that really requires interdisciplinary, interdepartmental collaborations. And I think that's what we're super strong at. And hopefully the students that join us will be equally interested.
Thank you, Helen. James, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Sure. I am also at Cornell Tech, and I am a law faculty member. And I'm basically here because absolutely everything that I do is interdisciplinary. I do law as it connects to computers and computer science and information science. So I'm especially enthusiastic to have IS students who push in interesting legal directions.
Thank you, James. Steve, you're next on my screen.
Hi, I'm Steve Jackson. I'm here in Ithaca, and I kind of work in some ways at the intersection of everybody who's just gone before. So I do a lot of stuff around infrastructure and collaboration. I'm interested in how new computing forms meet old, settled, deeply layered historical and social practices. I've done work for a long time around maintenance and repair as kind of the neglected backstory of technology and modern life more generally. And I'm currently this is the update part, I guess, Helen. I'm moving more and more into questions of material ethics. So questions, there's a class and a sort of a broader research idea around computing on Earth. So how would our understanding of computing change if we thought of it as a practice coming from and returning to the Earth instead of this thing that just floats magically in the sky, as the cloud metaphor usually suggests?
Thank you, Steve. Nathan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Nathan Matthias. I'm the lead of the Citizens and Technology Lab. And the work that we do overlapping with these critical and legal questions often has to do with like taking a critical perspective on the role of technology companies and technology platforms in society. And often that takes a few forms. Sometimes we are doing industry independent research to try to hold companies accountable and inform the public about the impacts of those technologies. Sometimes we are reimagining how social research happens. Most recently, for example, I co-authored a series of articles with a Ph.D. student, Jonathan Zong, looking at how both feminist and post-colonial theories of power might change how we reimagine research ethics and the way we do computational research, work that we've just published, and also doing work on the kind of social impacts and understanding how to think about the social impacts of algorithms on marginalized groups, most recently publishing a piece with the Just Tech platform at the Social Science Research Council and submitting a number of items to the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy National Strategy for Artificial Intelligence. And so the best projects at Cat Lab tend to have an element of social science, an element of practical value to communities, and also to contribute to policy in some way, either by contributing to these national conversations or questions about legislation, or in time, I expect we'll see some of our research actually be useful in different legal cases related to technology governance. So, like others here, always excited to bring together like technical, legal, and critical perspectives. I guess I should finally note that I'm a co-PI on a grant together with a number of other faculty at Cornell, and particularly a bunch of folks at Cornell Tech, looking at content moderation and encrypted communications, another thing that, along with James Grimmelman and others, deeply engages with law and policy.
Thank you, Nathan. Tap, would you like to go?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Tapin Parikh. Welcome to all the prospective students. Really excited to see so many of you here virtually, at least. Yeah, I've for the last few years, what I've been working on is, I would say, like approaches to computing education that take a more critical lens, and that's working at different age groups. So one area of my work is with kind of middle school and elementary school kids, and there we're looking at a couple of different things. You know, one, how technology can be a way of having discussions or convening groups that are difficult to convene for other reasons. And then also, rather than thinking about computing education as being a way of building new technologies, thinking of it as a way of interrogating existing ones with a deeply technical as well as a social lens. So that's, you know, that's with middle schoolers and younger people. And then I also teach a graduate class at Cornell Tech that essentially takes a Marxian kind of approach to thinking about, and also post-colonial kind of approach to thinking about the relationship between technology and political economy and social movements. And so that's, and you know, I think right now it's for master's students, but I eventually want to make it available to PhD students as well. So thanks and happy to take any questions.
Great. Let me introduce myself. I'm Phoebe Sengers. I'm, like my colleagues, faculty here in information science. I have a cross appointment in science and technology studies, and my work looks broadly at issues around the politics of technology design. I use ethnographic, historical, and design methods in combination to understand the kind of visions that technology designers have for what their technologies are going to do for the world, to understand how designers and engineers orient to those visions while they're building the technologies, and then to look at the impacts, the long-term impacts that those have on the communities that those technologies touch. So a lot of my current work is about rural computing and rural infrastructure. I'm working on a book project on the long-term impact of what you might call old-fashioned technology like electricity and road transportation on a small Canadian fishing village. And I'm springboarding from that work to work with computer scientists who are building new networking infrastructure to see if we can design that technology in ways that will have less detrimental impacts on communities that are on the edge of infrastructure. My students work on a wide variety of topics related to the politics of technology design. So issues around marginalization on platforms and how data scientists actually do their work on a day-to-day basis, invisible labor in that, a wide variety of topics, but they're united in this interest in deeply combining an understanding of kind of the ethnographic or historical kind of real world impacts of technology with this process of design that we all engage in. So we've got a time for questions from you folks. So I'll give a second and see if anybody's got a live question that you want to ask. You can raise your hand or put it in the chat. And otherwise I'll pretend to be a student and ask some questions. Okay, let me go ahead and jump in and ask for anyone who would like to answer this. What's one piece of advice that you would give to a student who's entering the Cornell Information Science Department for their PhD?
All right, I could have a shot at that. There's probably about 20 things I'd want to say, but the first one I'd say is, like, a lot of students come in with an idea of what they want to do, and that's great. But give yourself the opportunity to be changed in the process. So, you know, there's a way in going into a PhD program with kind of like a very focused tunnel vision. And I don't think our program is going to support that super well anyway. I mean, I think you're naturally going to be exposed to things that make you think differently about the world. But make sure that you're open to that. I think most people that come in change in some form. I know very few people that came in saying, I'm going to do exactly this. And then 5 years later, 6 years later, they had done exactly that. The other, okay, so let me say one more, two things, and then I'll shut up. The other thing I'll say is that I think our program really thrives on and supports methodological pluralism. So you're going to encounter a lot of different ways of working through the PhD. All of us on the faculty have different ways of working. There's enormous respect and curiosity between ways of working, which is one of the reasons that I love to be here. I think if I were giving advice, the advice I do give to my PhD students is explore and engage that methodological pluralism, and also make sure you put down deep roots in an area such that you're not like just a little bit of this, 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 but that you're actually making deep connections between methods, and you have kind of a deep taproot that you can kind of draw on that really anchors your work, or a couple of taproots.
Thank you, Steve. Are there more words of wisdom for the students as they're considering entering IS? Helen, go ahead.
Mine's actually mainly to reinforce what Steve just said. And it was like, drink it all in. It's true that the application material has asked students to really outline a project. And obviously part of when we read those outlines, we're deciding, is there a good fit to this program? Because it's no good for anybody for a student to arrive and find they're not a good fit. So that's how we do it. But it's not like a contract that you signed with us, and everybody on the faculty understands that students shift, they grow, they and do everything possible to situate yourself in a place that feels comfortable and that you feel really wildly passionate about.
If it's okay, as MC, I'm going to throw in a little piece of advice, which is that, and it's especially for people who are working in topics that are connected to this area, that kind of critical qualitative work. People often feel like when they enter the program that they need to start publishing very quickly, and there can be pressure to publish quickly, especially if you have co-students who are working in technical disciplines where there's an expectation of early and frequent publishing. And my piece of advice is to remember that you're on your own journey, and often critical and qualitative work takes a little bit longer to ripen, and it's totally okay to give it the time, to give it that strong foundation. And then you're going to be writing really beautiful work, and you're not in competition with other people who are using different methodologies. Nathan, go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things I love about Cornell is the deep value that I see around me for work that gets out in the world and engages with communities, engages with issues that matter to people. And I think one of the most fun and fascinating opportunities as an early grad student is to take time to meet people outside of the university, get involved in things you're passionate about, and connect with, whether it's people you might do qualitative work or participatory work with, connect with folks, yes, inside of universities and the academy, but also folks outside of the academy who might really help you find your passion and be exciting and valuable partners for what you end up doing over time. There's just so many folks in this department who've done that. It's a really strong tradition here.
Thank you, Nathan. Laura.
Yeah, hi, thank you all. Have a question about graduate research assistantships. So as part of funding, so are there existing projects that the faculty here have going on that could be opportunities, and how as students do we find those opportunities?
That's a great question. Who would like to jump in on that first? I can talk a little bit about a project that I have going on. So I have a project, I have a current NSF grant, which is a collaborative project with a computer scientist and a sociologist of agriculture. And it's looking at how new digital agriculture computer networking is being developed, and to develop design and policy recommendations to improve its impact. And so on that project, I've had students who are doing ethnographic research. Some of it is embedded within the computer science team, so taking field notes on what people are building and how they're building it, actually pitching in to do some of the building sometimes. And we also have work on that project, which involves interviewing agricultural stakeholders who are working with other forms of new digital technologies for farming, to see how they've taken up previous technologies to kind of predict what's going to be happening with this. So that's something where I've been hiring some GRAs. Does anyone else have examples they want to talk about?
Just a question, Phoebe, is there a systematic way that students can find out about projects like yours, for example?
That's a good question, and I'm not actually completely sure the answer of how to. I think the method that Laura is using, where you ask faculty and find out, is the only way we have currently. I don't think we have a systematic way.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on to that, I think this is happening all over the place. Like we have most of our faculty are hiring GRAs in various forms under externally funded projects, under startup grants that they're working on. So most faculty are engaging students in this way. Some faculty are engaging a lot of students in this way. I think a lot of these things build from relationships that start forming. Actually, some of them start like kind of from right now or from the application stage. But once you're on campus, you'll get to know people through classes you might take. Through interactions, we encourage students to reach out to faculty. You can, if there's an area you think you're interested in, reach out to the faculty, say, hey, I'm really interested in your work on X, or I read your paper, or I've heard about this thing you're doing on Y. Could we grab coffee sometime, or could we set up a Zoom call? I think people are very responsive to that, and then you and they can kind of figure out the fitting from there. But it often ends up being kind of advisors or committee members, but it's not exclusive to that. So certainly I've worked with students, I've hired students as GRAs who were not my immediate advisees or whose committees I served on, and I know that's true of others too. So it's kind of a vague answer, but it kind of builds organically from interactions. And the advice piece is to not be shy about reaching out. The faculty are really happy to hear from grad students. Occasionally they're overwhelmed by email and then slow and glitchy on response and so on, but I've never met a faculty member who isn't interested in hearing from grad students, even if they might say, oh, let's have a coffee and maybe I don't have anything right now, but I'm actually really glad to hear you're interested in this and let's keep talking.
Yeah, I might add to that many of the grants that I've gotten have actually been developed in collaboration with students to support the research. And it's typical in my group that students aren't working on exactly the same thing that I am. And so it's developing that relationship over time and then writing grants to support it. So let me ask one more question with which is, what makes Cornell a unique kind of place to do your work? Why are you doing this work here, either in the department or in conversation with the department? Gilly, go ahead.
I can speak to this as perhaps the newest faculty in the call. I think I came from a humanities and interpretive social science background in a department where things were very, I'd say, kind of the single author mindset. And what I was both surprised by, but also really excited by, is how collaborative this particular department is, as well as the nature of the work, right? We all come at from a topical shared interest in information science and information technologies, and then bring different perspectives, both in terms of who we think of as the actors and the stakeholders, as well as the methodologies that we bring into the table. But I think I've previously been in spaces where when you enter a more technical space and you are the humanities, interpretive social science person, you have to do a lot of the translation work yourself. That is, the mathematical work is inherently important, and then you have to explain why you are also valuable. And what really struck me about this place is, thanks to many people on this call, I felt like the heavy lifting of that translation has been done. Nobody is questioning why a historian, at least I haven't heard them questioning to my face, why a historian might fit in this department and in this community, and why my research is also valuable. And I think that the fact that we have so many faculty on this panel is an indication of the fact that this is exactly that kind of interdisciplinary space.
Thank you, Gilly. Other thoughts?
What Gilly said. Does that count as another thought?
Thank you, Helen. Yeah, and I have to say for myself, I have an interdisciplinary background in computer science and critical theory originally. And I spent a lot of time being the odd one out in every context. So in computer science departments, you're not a real computer scientist. And then in a humanities or arts context as being the weird one with a technical background. And it's been such a pleasure to be in information science where it's normal. And the conversations are there that allow for that interchange so that I can be geeking out on like the technical details of this networking architecture. And at the same time, I can be going into discussing 1950s fishery modernization. And I don't have to constantly explain why those have something to do with each other. That's been a real joy.
Yeah, and just to add on to all of that, I'd say that one thing that in some ways, one of the reasons that we're all here on the faculty side in information science, instead of a straight disciplinary home, which all of us could land in, is that we're actually motivated and excited by curiosity for things beyond the immediate things we do. We think that's where a lot of the discovery, the open space is going to happen. Just speaking personally, I find it more interesting to have that range around me than to be surrounded only by people who think in the exact same way, broadly similar way, kind of methodologically and theoretically about the world. So, I think you see it, and I see it in all of my colleagues. So I get as geeked out on algorithmic stuff, which is way outside my knowledge, as John Kleinberg does on philosophical things that are partly outside of his knowledge, although his knowledge is wider than mine, so it might even be in his knowledge. So I think that principle of mutual curiosity across areas is kind of why we're all here as in a location. And it's one of the things that, for me, it's the great joy. I mean, I partly do live in STS as well. It's a wonderful home, but I love being in InfoSci and having access to things and people that don't see the world in exactly the same way I do all the time.
Great. So Nathan, I'm going to give you the last word.
You'll probably hear me repeating this multiple times, but one thing I love is absolutely required to do this. There's a critical mass of people who care about doing good scholarship that also makes a difference in the world, right? We have on this call people who do that in so many ways. And I think that's a really rare and special thing that layers on top of all the interdisciplinarity that others have mentioned.
Great, thank you. And thank you all for coming. Feel free to reach out if you've got any questions that you'd like to ask anybody individually. Enjoy the rest of your visit day.
Maybe I'll ask Roz and Fede to talk a little about a project that you guys have been working on recently. You're two second and first year students in the lab that I co-direct with David Mimno, where we do all kinds of awesome things.
I guess I can just briefly do a quick introduction. My name is Roz. I'm a second year PhD student in information science, and I study digital humanities, computational social sciences, especially looking at online communities and how they talk about books or shared media online. But I think Federica and I, if you want to wave, I'll let you talk too in a moment. We wanted to talk a little bit about a project that we've been working on, or just share a little bit about the type of work that you could do in IS. So this semester, we've been collaboratively working on a project studying endometriosis support communities online and how people go about sharing their narratives about their experiences with getting diagnosed, and also talking about their relationships with people in their daily lives, and where they find support, and also where the online community enters in that support system. I'm also realizing I forgot to mention that I work with Matt Wilkins and David Mimno. And also I'm happy to answer any questions offline if people have questions about working on starting a research project or what it's like to be a grad student at Cornell. Fede, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself and if there's anything you'd like to add.
Yeah, thank you for the very clear explanation of the project. I'm Fede. I work with Matt Wilkins, and I'm a first year PhD in information science. I'm interested in computational social science and digital humanities. specifically related to health and gender. So of course that fits very well with the endometriosis project. One thing we really want to achieve with this project is to give voice to the community and to support them in their search for better care, whatever that can look like. And of course, we're really excited about like hearing from you guys and seeing you guys here. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Maybe while we wait for whoever wants to go next, whether student, faculty, anything like that. Roz, Fede, any one thing that has stood out from the project so far? Anything you want to highlight as an initial finding? I know it's in some level it's still early days, but.
Do you have something specific in mind, Roz? Otherwise, maybe I can also go ahead.
Yeah, maybe if you want to talk about like the topic modeling results, because I think
yeah, 100%.
If there's something else you wanted to talk about.
Yeah. So I guess what has really like been evident for us in this community is how much they care for each other and how much they talk about the community itself, and how understanding and going and have through this experience is unique to them. And this is also clear with like unsupervised methods like topic modeling. We ran it on the community, and it's really interesting to see how clear there is a topic model literally about sharing, about thanking each other and sharing compassion and providing support, as well as like topics on hormonal therapy and treatment and laparoscopy surgery. And I can get into detail, but maybe it's also upsetting for some of you guys. So one thing is though that like it's really clear how strong this community is, and that's why it's important to study this kind of community.
Ian, yeah.
Yeah, I have a question for you. So I think for you too. So I think something that's awesome is when there are like collaborations among students and faculty. And like presumably you didn't know each other when you started this program at Cornell. And I think for all the prospective students, it'd be great to know like, how did this come to be that you're working on this project together?
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll say, first of all, one of my main goals with choosing IS was to do collaborative work and not be just working alone on projects, or find other grad students to work with. So I guess Fede and I had a class together and also ended up in the same lab. And so we just started talking about a lot of materials through classes and during lab. And I know Fede came in wanting to work on something with chronic illness. And it was something I was really passionate about, but I felt like I couldn't necessarily do by myself. So I think this was something where like her expertise, and I'd been doing research for about a year, and I think like I could help kind of get the research off the ground too. But yeah, it's been really positive, and I would recommend it for anyone, especially starting research. I don't know, Fede, if there's anything you want to add.
Yeah, it's been an amazing experience. I feel like it's really one thing, especially coming from a humanities background, that I didn't get as an undergrad and a master's student is collaborative work. Again, as just Ross mentioned, like it's really important in this department. And it really is a matter of fitting different kinds of expertise. So I was coming in with some like view of like how to study online communities, and Roz like implemented also like her share, and this really improved the project a lot. And it definitely helped as a first year to have someone who knew how the department was running, and also just was able to share so much knowledge also outside of the project and like how the project fits inside of the department and with faculty. So that was really valuable. So definitely recommended.
One other thing is that I think there's a broad range of research that's in this area. And so like there's very different projects from the one that Fede and I just spoke about. So I don't know if it would be helpful to hear about other projects that maybe are very different from this type of work.
Ian, Allison, Nate, anyone who wants in to just say a little bit about what you're working on right now. Again, I'm sure the students have all read your bios, but like what's keeping you up at night these days? Nate.
Yeah, one of the things I love about
IS and about this particular culture is the kind of breadth that this collection of people brings. Some people do natural language processing, other people do experiments, some people contribute computer science. And so I actually want to point out other people's work that I admire here in IS. So just kind of looking here, a couple of people that come to mind. I really admire and appreciate the work of Renee Kizelchek. So Renee does intervention science, does this fascinating work on education, large-scale online learning, and also like broadening inclusion in education through this kind of social science with computational approach. And one of the cool things about this department in this field is that we're able to keep abreast of people who do work that is different but adjacent to ours and find ways to collaborate. So Renee and I haven't found an opportunity to collaborate yet, but I can look at many other people in this like set of boxes and think, oh, there are cool possibilities there. And one example would be a grant that Professor Moore-Neyman and a number of other IS folks are on together with my lab that looks at content moderation and encrypted communications, where we're hoping to make contributions, yes, to the social sciences, but also to computer science, to policy, by studying some of these challenging issues around how you keep people safe, and how you also keep communications secure. So those are just two examples that come to mind. I think one thing I find really inspiring about this group is how attentive and excited we all are about each other's work and how much inspiration we draw from each other. And that's something that we hope to create as an environment for all of you to enjoy and flourish in as well.
Let me just take up the charge and thank Nathan for the shout out and say that I completely agree with that sentiment, that it is a very collaborative environment. If I just look at some of the PhD students in my lab, maybe I should say a little bit more about the lab. So the Future of Learning lab has 4 or 5 PhD students, 2 postdocs, a number of undergraduates, master students. They meet every week. They discuss issues. We've got outside speakers coming in. We've got internal speakers coming in. For instance, this week we've got a Cornell undergraduate who's created an app called AI Learner, and she's done amazing progress in creating these games for students with disabilities to learn basic mathematics. And she's going to present on the application that they've created and is looking for research collaborations with students in order to push it to the next level and maybe raise funding in order to support it further. So that's sort of the kind of environment that we're in. It also allows students to seek out people outside of the department to bring them onto their doctoral committee. One important thing to remember is that your advisor is, of course, a key player in your doctoral program, but the committee as a whole matters a lot too, right? And so that is your team that stands behind you, and that team can be quite broad in scope. You can find committee members who are not only in IS but also outside. For instance, one of my students is doing work on professional development, professional learning. And she found somebody in the ILR school, the Industrial Labor Relations School, who focuses on human resource development, who's an expert in professional learning environments. And so she brought him onto her committee. Somebody else found somebody in organizational behavior because she's studying how diversity, equity, and inclusion dashboards affect decision makers. So as you think about coming into this community, realize that there's a broad support from many different places, and you can come up with your own team that is going to work best for achieving your research goals going forward.
Maybe just to add a word about New York, here from the tech campus, this happens across campus. I think I'm the only New York rep here, but clearly work that Nate has been doing, been really great to do that with him and people here at Tech. In fact, from CS, we have the grant is CS, IS, Law, and Computer Science. and touches on all these different topics. So this is really fun. So things happen both at the campus level and across both campuses.
There's a good question. Oh, Christian, go ahead.
Oh, no, if there's a question, go ahead. Yeah.
There's a question in the chat from Jude. Thanks for posing this. Just saying, in such a collaborative culture, faculty members probably hear about many projects that could be relevant to their work, given their limited capacity. What are some examples they look for in a potential collaboration with a student? That is a great question, because yes, there are a lot of opportunities. Everything seems interesting, and you're constantly trying to figure out what to work on. Is it the maturity of the idea? Other involved faculty, some preliminary results. I'm curious, what have been your experiences about deciding which projects to pursue and which ones not to?
I can take this. This is a great question. I think part of the thing that you're learning as you do more and more research is to kind of select the ideas that are more likely to be feasible and that are more likely to be engaging in longer term, right? And this is something that we also try to teach our PhD students to gain that intuition of what's a project that you could approach and what's a project that should maybe wait a little bit more for more preliminary results. And a lot of it comes from personal excitement. Like you have to see that the student is very excited about it. A lot of it has to be like you as a faculty have to be able to contribute. Sometimes there are interesting ideas that maybe I'm not able to contribute myself, so I would direct the student to somebody else. And fortunately, we have a lot of breadth around Cornell. So like Matt and Renee and more mentioned, there's really a lot of interdisciplinary opportunities here. And I'm sure many universities say they do interdisciplinary work. We actually do it. And you can kind of just really look at our list of publications and see how we work with other people from other fields. And that's actually sometimes one of the questions that comes up when you're trying to select a project is what's the outcome in terms of what's the relevancy to your field, but maybe also to fields outside. And that's something where we seek input from other faculty and other students to try to understand how relevant this project would be. I'm not sure if this is answering the question, but that's my take. And again, I think what I generally tell my students, just really pick a problem that you feel really, really passionate about and it's gonna work out. So I think that's the main bit. Like you have to really be passionate and wake up thinking about the problem, and then you're like on a good path. We'll find something that works.
There's another really good question in the chat here about building international research collaborations. Is there a protocol? Is there a set of established relationships? Is this something that each student and each advisor sort of needs to navigate on their own? I know a number of us have experience with these kinds of international collaborations, but anyone want to talk through what they've experienced?
I can speak briefly to it and then let somebody else talk about it as well. In my experience, it's all a question of the connections that you have to institutions in that country. And sometimes you know somebody who knows somebody. And so, it's a conversation about where you would like to have the impact, what institutions might be the vehicles to help affect the kinds of changes that you would like to affect, or the kinds of data that you need to collect in order to perform the research. And then cold emails. I've advised students who are incredibly good at cold emailing people and getting data sets from them, or striking up collaborations that well, where I sometimes couldn't believe that they just emailed the CEO of this large company and got an email back. But I guess sometimes it works, and if you're persistent at it, it can lead to results. But there's a few different ways of handling this, and I think most important is to think through the strategy of which of the players in the country. It might be university systems, it might be NGOs, it might be governmental institutions, are best positioned to move forward the research. And so that's a great conversation to have with your advisors to come up with that strategy.
Anyone else want in on the international question? And then there's another new question about depth versus breadth, and just how you think about advising your students on both pursuing sufficiently broad stuff while also developing enough depth and expertise. Nate?
One brief thing I've seen as a pattern in many cases, let's say you want to do a collaboration with a third party in the US or outside of the US, and there are questions about resources. It's pretty common for graduate students and faculty to work together on funding applications that bring in the resources to make those collaborations possible. And Cornell has a pretty good track record of being successful. There's all sorts of institutional support to help you put together those philanthropic or other funding requests to bring in the resources needed in those cases where further resources are important. And faculty will often be fundraising in parallel and may have funds available from time to time.
I'll jump in on the depth versus breadth question. What you're really deciding right now is who do you want to spend a lot of time with? Ultimately, we like to emphasize collaboration here, and there are plenty of opportunities, but mostly you're going to be working with an advisor or a small number of people on your committee, the people in the group, like the lab group that you're going to be working with. So that's really that's what it comes down to a lot. Do you like and trust and trust the research taste of the people that you want to work with? So you saw a few examples of projects that Matt and I and our group, like Veda and Roz, have worked on. We mostly tend to work with advisors. At the same time, there's plenty of cases where I need to know something about numerical linear algebra, and there's lots of people here that I can talk to. Another of my students needed to know things about copyright and internet law, and James Grimmelman at Tech is just incredibly generous in his time. But we're still ultimately mostly working within groups. I like to describe a PhD program may look like a undifferentiated department from the outside, but internally, I think a good model is sort of a startup incubator, where every faculty member is sort of a startup company. And I think Cornell is unusually collaborative and interdisciplinary. But that should still be your model. You're looking for who do you want to work with. So I think we love to emphasize collaboration, but it is important to remember that a PhD really is about an advisor and a committee and the people that you're going to be spending a lot of time with.
Yeah, I would just add to that point, most people coming in have a relatively clear sense of who they'd like to work with. But of course, one of the things that you'll do in your first year too, through coursework, through seminars, is get to know people around the department, both faculty and other grad students. And so, because David's absolutely right, these are the people you're going to spend a lot of time with and on whom your research success will depend in part. So you do have an opportunity to do some feeling out during that first year. And of course, then it never stops. It never closes off. There's never a point where you say, no, we can't work with anyone else after this.
To add to that, you're also externally, not only internally, but externally, you are going to be targeting certain communities, right? So for example, my students normally target either the natural language community or more the kind of CSEW social computing community, right? And this is a choice that, we figured this out in the beginning. And as I said before, if I have, experience in that community, I can help the student. In the end, it's a lot of progress in many of these fields, including natural language processing and so on, comes from input from outside the field, from other fields, linguistics, sociology, and so on. This doesn't mean that my work doesn't still belong in natural language processing, but it's perhaps more sometimes, or our work in information science, because we have all this input, we can do something different than somebody that doesn't have this input in a way, right? So it's not an either or kind of choice, right? You can be collaborative, but also be very relevant in your field, in your specific area. And I think that's, you can also take a look at where our students tend to get jobs in multiple departments. So they get, like being in a community is really important further down the line.
I'll take the changing advisors. I know we're almost out of time. I think any of us will be willing to stick around and take questions offline. Changing advisors is not common, but it's not uncommon either. There's usually not necessarily a process, but kind of a standard procedure for shopping around, finding a new advisor. There are any number of reasons why initial advisor matches might not be where you end up. The whole point of a PhD program is to grow and change and become a better version of yourself. And sometimes that involves different people than you started out with. I think in general, I was a director of graduate studies for the last couple of years. I'm currently on sabbatical. But in most cases, we were able to find a great match. It's also, a lot of people discovered that they would rather not be a PhD student, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that as well. You should be going into this process because you're excited about it, and because it's something that you want to have that degree and that opportunity at the end of it. But nobody wants you to be miserable, and there's absolutely no reason to go through with something if you're not really excited about it.
I don't think there's any specific agenda or format for this meeting. This is a cluster of faculty who work in areas relevant to design for marginalized communities and social justice, HCI for D or ICTD and those sorts of things, and variations of those. So I guess we can do this in a couple of different ways, but maybe the best would just be to say, to open it up for all of you prospective students to ask questions, anything you're interested in learning about, anything about this particular research area or a particular faculty member's research. While you think of your questions, we might just give each of the faculty members here a brief, think of it as like a 30-second introduction to who you are and what you do, not a 5-minute spiel. And I guess we'll start maybe with Chris, since you were first on the call.
Sure. Yeah, hi, my name is Chris. You sent me hi. I'm relatively new to information science. I think I'm the newest of all the faculty here. I've been here about 1.5 years. Came from having been in Portugal for about 6 years. And before that, best known for starting the Center for Civic Media at MIT, where we specifically looked at how to build technologies for geographic communities, physical located communities. After that, I went on to found a small organization called Rutio that builds radio stations. We launched radio stations in they're kind of internet-enabled radio stations in Uganda, Cape Verde, rural Romania, islands in Ireland, all over, that were really kind of around focusing on how communities can develop their own information platforms for deliberation and discussion. So that's kind of my background a bit.
Great. Let's do Karen.
Okay. I'm Karen Levy. Nice to meet you all, or I know that you're all there. Those of you who can't see, nice to see some of your faces. This is my 6th year in the information science department. My background disciplinarily is in sociology and in law. So I study the social and legal and ethical implications of new technologies.
That was fantastic.
I tried to keep it real short, like you said, Nikki. I'm following direction.
Excellent. Good job. Let's do Aditya next.
Hey, everyone. I'm Aditya. I'm a 3rd-year faculty in information sciences. And my research focuses on how do you design, build, and evaluate technologies for underserved communities. Specifically, my lab is focusing on misinformation in low-income communities, designing for community health programs, and focusing on explainable AI for people who are low literate. So if you are interested in any of these topics, drop me a message.
Steve.
Well, I guess I have to say I'm an 11th year faculty member, so I feel old. So I met some of you in the interpretive thing yesterday. The part of my work that connects here, I care a lot about questions of technology and inequality. And I've been involved often with students in projects kind of around the world, often in South or Southeast Asia. And increasingly, in part, we have a really interesting project with Chris now that's more domestic in focus. The work that I do tends to draw on ethnographic and anthropological traditions, sometimes historical traditions. So I don't design or build things, but I study how communities engage moments of the building. And maybe I'll say as a meta comment that I actually think that's a great strength. The combination of methods and approaches that we practice in InfoSci is made stronger by being put together. I think it's an excellent place to do this kind of work, but that's enough. That's all I'll say.
Absolutely. And I'm Nikki Dell. I'm a faculty member. I've been here now for 6 years. So I guess getting on the older side of the folks on this call. I'm based at the Cornell Tech campus in New York City. And generally my research looks at designing and building technologies for marginalized communities. I do about half my work with domestic communities in New York City, specifically survivors of intimate partner violence and home healthcare workers. And then I also do quite a bit of work in the global South, places like Kenya, India, also looking at community health workers and other populations. So I like to try and balance those two aspects of my work. It's been a little bit harder during COVID to keep up as much with the international work, but hopefully looking forward to getting back into that a bit more. So I think we have a nice group of prospective students, hopefully on the call. Just want to open up the floor for questions to one person, all of the people.
Hi. Yeah, I was wondering, so this is a little specific to my research interest, but maybe will be relevant for other folks too. But I was wondering if any of you within your work engage with education and training within the communities, and if you could talk a little bit about that, if so.
Sure, I can go first. I've definitely done some work and are doing some work with teachers in India. The work is mostly led by my PhD student, Rama Varanasi, who has been looking at how teachers are using technology in their everyday practice and how that may or may not be causing them stress and overwork and encouraging negative kinds of impacts that are often overlooked when we think about the wonderful benefits that technology can bring to the world. We tend to ignore the additional work and stress. So a lot of his work has been focused on that. And yeah, so more on the teacher side, but it's been fascinating work. I don't know if others have work to talk about.
Sure. I would say that, yeah, we education is probably a pretty important aspect of any project if you're, say, introducing a new technology to community. And a lot of that has to do with us educating ourselves about potential impacts and what we're expecting to find from community dynamics, and that often puts us in dialogue with people who then are leading kind of initiatives around education, or as we often kind of discussed it, more kind of deliberation patterns within the community. So for instance, when we're releasing these new media platforms in rural Uganda or rural Romania, we would work with kind of local media experts always as kind of intermediaries who would work with us to understand, what we were bringing, what we were co-designing, and they would often be involved in the co-design process early on. And then they would also then lead media training sessions and things like that within the community, sometimes for weeks at a time. So we, had a great experience once with a person who had developed the first journalism program, Ph.D. in Uganda. And he was kind of our, he would go to communities and work with them intensively, through the process of kind of launching radio stations. Uganda is a place where radio stations can be closed down if there's, certain types of political speech. We were working in an area that had a long civil war. So we also worked with scholars of peace communications who kind of focus on how to discuss history and politics in a way that is less likely to kind of rekindle animosities or trauma for people who were in this area of a 20-year civil war. So lots of different dynamics that we could talk about more.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, just to chime in really quickly. So we have worked with community health workers in India for maybe like 7 years now. And to give you a context, so these are health workers who are expected to provide essential healthcare services in the communities. So family planning advice, maternal and neonatal care. And you would be surprised that many of these workers have only 8 years or 10 years of formal education. They take medical training for just 3 weeks, and then they are expected to be in the community and deliver these services. So clearly, like, they are not generally well prepared to do the kinds of services which are expected from them. So we do a lot of work in strengthening and providing skills to these community health workers and designing interventions with them on what are the best ways to support them on the ground, and how we can mitigate the impacts of health misinformation, particularly so like during the coronavirus pandemic, when they were inundated with all kinds of misinformation in person when they were meeting with people, as well as like digitally, which was coming through their phones. So we work with lots of community health organizations, on ground grassroots agencies, which work with these health workers to design training programs for them, to upskill them, to work with them to understand, is there a role of technology, right? I mean, you could certainly easily design technology for anyone, but then the question is technology going to be doing more good or more harm? So it's important to be cautious when you're working with these communities, and we take a number of steps to mitigate some of the negative implications of introducing technologies in these communities. So if you're interested in that, again, follow.
Cool. Ian, question.
Yeah, thank you so much, by the way. My question is, it's kind of like a three-part question. One is specifically like, what neighborhoods in New York City or communities in New York City are you engaging with? How do you build trust in those communities, or how have you established trust? And what is the reception of Cornell Tech specifically in these communities and in New York City more broadly?
That is a great multi-part question. So, I mean, I can talk about my personal projects, noting that, there are a lot of other research efforts going on, not only at Cornell Tech, but also in Ithaca with various kinds of communities in the city. My own work in the city is, so if I start with the home health aid work that I do, we engage mostly with aides who are employed by home care agencies and who are part of the 1199 United Healthcare Workers Union here, which is one of the largest unions in the country for healthcare workers. The communities tend to be mostly older women of color, mostly or predominantly people who have immigrated to the US and who speak usually Spanish and English. The other part of your question, how do they receive the research? How do they receive us? How do they engage with it? They, for the most part, have, like, we've had a really warm reception, I would say. Certainly from the home healthcare perspective, there's a sense that there's not enough attention being paid to these this workforce and these issues. And so to some extent, anyone who's willing to talk to them and listen to their perspectives and try and advocate for them as a workforce is kind of viewed in a positive way. Definitely, and I can say this for pretty much everyone on the call, the fact that we take a lot of time and energy to work with organizations who are champions for these workers is very important. So we're not coming in and necessarily waving the Cornell tech flag. We're kind of being introduced through their union and through their agencies and through other organizations that are very much already working with them. So we certainly need to be mindful of that, in that we are afforded a level of trust and power, I would say, that we wouldn't necessarily have if we were coming in without those connections and relationships with the other organizations that they care about. The other community that I work with here mostly consists of survivors of intimate partner violence, and we take a very similar approach. We partner with a lot of advocacy organizations, including public centers for providing services. And so we kind of form one node of work within this broader landscape of work. So it's a similar sort of reception, I would say. But certainly there are a lot of power dynamics and I would say skill set / knowledge dynamics that happen. And so we have to do a lot of work to try and balance all of those things and make sure we're doing the work in hopefully the right way.
Can I chime in on that, Nikki? Do you mind?
Please do.
I really love that question, Ian, in part because, you know, so I don't actually do like participatory, I don't do design. I don't like deploy things into communities. I do mostly like qualitative social science research or legal research. So it's still, you know, engaging with people, but in a different way, right? And across the department, you have seen and maybe will continue to see people who are doing all sorts of methodological strategies are at play. But this question of like trust is sort of unifying, right? Like even for folks who are doing computational social science or are doing stuff that like doesn't look like it has people in it, part of kind of the whole point of IS is to recognize how there are still people in it and how all of our research like has to be done with, you know, trust and like a sense of the community that's being affected by your research or that has, you know, given rise to the data that you're collecting in like a really explicit way. So one thing that I've really enjoyed, you know, kind of on Steve's point about like cross-pollination, I've really enjoyed talking to folks who do all these different styles of research about like the way that they approach research ethics. There's kind of a universal recognition that like some of the institutional measures in place, like around like getting an IRB approval, for example, that's like a floor, not a ceiling, right? Like we all have to do that. It's a good thing for us to have to do, but it's by no means adequate, right? And it's been really cool to see how, you know, people coming from different traditions sort of translate those needs in different ways. Oftentimes it does look like going back to the community in one way or another. And sometimes that even, like I worked with one student who was collecting data from Reddit, and like her way of re-engaging with it was about birth stories, like the stories that people post about when they give birth and like the medicalization of that experience. For her, that looked like writing a blog post and posting it to the Reddit about, you know, trying to kind of give back some of that knowledge to the community and maintain an open line of communication. So it always looks different. There's never a right answer. But being reflexive, I think, is kind of unifying across disciplinary traditions.
I see there was a question Drew posted in the chat that maybe we'll ask Steve to reflect on. How do you measure high impact research?
Yeah, it's a great question. And what I would say is like the things you mentioned in the chat there, number of papers, citations, on-ground impact, any and all of that. And there's a lot of variation by area within that. So one of the important commitments of the department is to support and evaluate like work in like ways, right? So we don't want to impose a metric of success that comes from one kind of sub area of the department on other areas. So in some parts of the department, there's the disciplinary norm or the practical norm is to get involved and publish early. And if you're in that area, that's great, right? That can be a really strong thing. there's other forms of work in the department where there's more of a slow burn kind of apprentice model. And the idea, like if you're a anthropologist or if you're an interpretive science and technology studies scholar, the idea of, oh, I'm going to publish a paper in my first year would be considered kind of absurd, right? It's just not what you do. What you do is you lay a deep foundation for your work. You do deeply embedded work, and then that issues things later on. Essentially that question about your publishing strategy and what counts as success is driven in part by what you care about in the world, right? So you might have particular ethical commitments in your work that you want to see through in your research and your teaching, and we will work with you to support that. And then it's also, conditioned a little bit by norms in your area of work, right? So if you're in a lab like or a sort of a more incremental, sometimes conference publishing culture where the norm is to get papers out early and more papers as time goes on, then we'll support that too. But the key thing is that we're not going to, if you're not in that model, we're not going to try and make you into that model. And essentially, we're trying to give you the best foundation for you to build the research program and the career you want to build, according to the lights of what you care about in the world and according to the lights of what other people will recognize as quality in that area of work. So that's kind of big. I don't know, do other faculty want to jump in on that? That's maybe people have something more specific than that.
I think that's, sorry, Nikki, go ahead. Okay, I'll just say super fast. Like, to be completely candid, I think one of the, this is sort of the secret sauce, right, of information science, is that it's a big box of misfits or something, and we all cross-pollinate. And that does mean that comparing work or comparing, like you were saying, right, metrics of impact, like Steve says, is just difficult. I'll be honest with you that I think that it's good not to compare yourself to other students in the program, probably in all programs, because you'll just drive yourself crazy. But this is a place where you definitely cannot do that, because as Steve mentioned, what looks like success in one lab and what looks like success in another lab are so different that it's not, they're not commensurable at all. And I'll be honest with you that I think that's great and ultimately leads to a much more creative set of projects than if everybody was oh, I have to publish in this journal, right? Which was my PhD is in sociology, and it was much more we were all kind of trying to do roughly the same thing, right? And we measured it in roughly the same way. It is hard though, right? Because it means that I think especially for early stage PhD students, knowing if you're doing a good job requires a little bit more conversation with your faculty mentors and just looking inward, right? Because there isn't a measuring stick that you're going to be able to easily apply to your work. So it's good. I think that's ultimately one of the exciting things about the department, but it does mean that there's less obvious structure or means of kind of measuring than there might be in a more purely disciplinary department.
I would just add, I'm not muted, yeah. I would just add that when you're doing community engaged work, as many of the people on this call are, and as a PhD student, you do need to pay attention, I would say, to both your academic impact and your community impact. As a PhD student, you cannot forego caring about academic impact. That's kind of part of the work and the research, and you're in a PhD program to do that, whatever form that may take. As Steve and Karen say, it could be conference papers, it could be eventual book publications, it could be other things, but there is certainly a notion of intellectual and academic impact. At the same time, I would say we definitely do make room for thinking about community impact as well, and trying to disseminate your findings or measure how your work is impacting the communities that you care about, hopefully in good, but also paying attention to potentially negative consequences or unforeseen consequences that you should certainly be aware of. So I would say you can't kind of focus on only one of those things. You need to pay attention to both. We have about
one last small addition to that too, is that it depends a little bit on where you want to go, right? So one of the conversations I try and have with students early-ish on is kind of getting a sense of their own sense of outcome, right? People can orient to an academic career, right? A faculty type career. And that might have certain recommended, if you want to do that, you may want to try to do a bit more of this kind of thing. But people can orient in different ways. They can orient to industry, they can orient to government, they can orient to nonprofit, they can orient to art world. Sometimes we've had a couple people head in those directions. So the question of impact is tied to the question of where you want to go, right? So if somebody's orienting to a particular kind of career that's different than, let's say, I want to become a professor at a tenured, an R1 research-centered university, we're not going to put those kinds of expectations on that student. Same thing with, like, even within the academic world, there are more research-centered places and there are more teaching-centered places, and both can be wonderful places to be. We've had students go to teaching-centered careers, and in that case, then some of the work we'll be doing through the PhD. We all care about teaching, and all of our students work on teaching. But if you're orienting to, like, let's say I want to teach in a liberal arts college, the research parts of my work are important to me, but for me, teaching is really the center of what I care about in the world. Then we're gonna, this is maybe slightly outside the research question, but we're gonna make sure that we build for you, work with you to build a program in which teaching skill and care is really centrally developed. So it depends on the area, depends on your goals. Those, I'd say, are the two things that probably most condition that choice.
We only have 2 minutes left before we have to release you to all of the interactive design and Ubicomp faculty. So I don't know, maybe we can just do any closing thoughts on why Cornell IS is awesome and everybody should immediately join us. Maybe once again, Chris, we'll ask you to go first.
I have to say it's my experience has been of a very caring and thoughtful campus. I've been in a lot of different academic environments, and this is the one where I see people doing the work for love the most, and treating each other the best. So
I have been reflecting on this question for my career as well. Like when I joined the IS program, I graduated with a CS PhD. And I have been so fortunate to be in an IS program because there is the only defined path to success. Like what this program allows you to figure out what you want to be, where you want to be, and how you want to reach to that path. So this flexibility, which an IS program offers you, the interdisciplinary nature of the program, the cross-pollination of ideas, that's fantastic. That's the strength why you should come to Cornell IS. We have fantastic people here, students and faculty alike.
Karen?
Yeah, I mean, it's repetitive with what other folks have said, but I think Cornell IS self-selects for folks who are open to multiple ways of knowing. Like if you think my way is the best way to know stuff or to do science or research and every other way is not as good, then you shouldn't come, right? Because the whole experience, the whole point is to sort of recognize how we all kind of feed into each other, and you really need, this big breadth and diversity of approaches. And culturally, I think what that implies is we have to develop mutual trust in each other. We have to be open to learning from each other. We have to be modest about what our perspective can and can't tell us about the world. And if you get together a big group of people who kind of all have that, sense of one another, it really does develop a really super strong, in my view, a super strong and cohesive community, which I think leads to the culture that Chris was getting at about how we all kind of care about one another and value each other's views. So I really love it. I know we're supposed to say that, but I really mean it. I really do like it a lot here and find it super generative.
Steve?
Yeah, so I just say exactly what everyone has said. So intellectual range plus care across areas, and that's those two things together. Neither one independently works on its own, but the two things together work really well. And then the other thing I'll say, just because it hasn't been said, is that I think there are also great resources. Information science is very well hooked into other excellent research and programs at the university. So whatever your area is, you can, in addition to everything you get in InfoSci here, you can immediately find some of the world's best Xologists, right? Whatever the X is. So I think what you can get in InfoSci together with the resources of the wider university And the fact that that's actually a really easy transit to make. People are it's not like Cornell as an institution is not like a kingdom of an empire of kingdoms or something like that. It's really connects well. So that's what I would say. But everything everyone else said was the most important stuff: interdisciplinary care, excellence, and respect.
Excellent. So we're 2 minutes over. When you jump over to the Ubicomp group, tell them, that I kept you, it's my fault. And hopefully you can have fun talking to them about other cool research. Thanks everyone for coming. We hope you join us.
Welcome to the PhD students. I think this is the Ubicomp PhD session, but actually a lot of it is just who had time to talk to you during this time slot as opposed to other time slots. It's meant to be an open-ended casual thing. So I think we're not all going to go around and do formal presentations. And I think we can just quickly, the faculty who are here, introduce ourselves. And then I think we'll just let it turn into Q&A. I'm Wendy Ju. I'm actually in my driving simulator lab at Cornell Tech in New York. Here we are, car. In between one meeting and the next, I was just in a meeting with Chan Yang. I work on studying how people interact with automation and designing the next generation of things.
And car, clearly, because we saw a car.
Yeah, in a car. Francois, you should go next since you spoke.
Oh yeah, so my name is François Gambretier, and I'm in the Ithaca campus, where you can see the sun is shining. And so I'm doing a technical HCI, in particular human robot interaction, and also device. So for example, I'm collaborating with Cheng on different kind of sensing on the body.
I can go. I'm Tanzim Chowdhury. I am in Ithaca campus now. I don't know. It's fuzzy, but I'm in New York City. And I was in Ithaca, and so I've been in both campuses, and I work on kind of mobile systems and sensors for health behavior tracking, and I am also part of the health tech kind of program director at Cornell Tech. And Raja Lakshmi and I share a great lab together in building cool hardware and also kind of applications in healthcare. So I will hand it off to Raja Lakshmi.
Thanks, Tanzim. I'm Raja Lakshmi Nandakumar. I'm not on a beach. I'm actually in the campus. You would just see an empty boat, so I thought a beach would be better. My research area is wireless sensing and mobile systems. I develop technologies that can enable applications primarily in the health space. So I collaborate a lot with Tanzim. And I also enable applications more recently in digital agriculture and IoT space.
Hey, I'm Chen Jiang. I'm an assistant professor in Ithaca campus. My research in large is about Ubicomp HCI. And most specifically, my research developed AI and wearable sensing to understand human behavior. Cindy, do you want to go next, since you're also wearable space?
Yeah, sure thing. So I'm Cindy Cao. I'm a faculty in the Department of Human-Centered Design, and I'm a field faculty in information science. And my lab, we work on emerging forms of wearable devices that are soft. So they often come in the form of smart tattoos or smart textiles. And we work on a digital fabrication, developing sensing systems, but also the design and also social perceptions of these devices. And I will hand it off to Quan.
To me. Hey everyone, I'm Qian. I'm an assistant professor also on Ithaca campus. I'm an UX designer. I study how AI changes the way we design human-centered applications. Recently, I've been working on how large language models change the way we design prototype human-centered NLP applications. We actually recently received a gift to study how to use chatbots to do participatory design in urban development and architecture design. I also have collaboration with Wendy on autonomous driving, so thinking about how these large-scale cross-cultural sort of data sets and vehicles change the way we design interactions.
That might be all the faculty. So yeah, maybe we'll, in general, I think you can just like lob questions at us in general or in specific, and then we'll do our best to tag team and answer.
I'll go, sure. I was curious, just like with COVID and like technical HCI and a lot of this work being kind of in lab, how that is shaping up with people coming back to campus. Everyone, I mean, it looks like everyone is in their buildings, also like collaborating between, yeah.
I think it's definitely kind of at least at Cornell Tech on the campus, right? The people are back in the labs and we're fully in person, and we so the faculty is on campus. So it's very close to kind of back to normal as we have been. And I think there was definitely kind of challenges during COVID time where there were things where during classes or building, we tried to mail things out and work kind of remotely and in trying to kind of still make progress. Some of the human subject studies were very difficult and slowed down quite a bit, but now it's quite a lot, like pretty much back to normal in terms of where things were and labs being open and people working there and collaborating and sharing space.
I can speak for the Ithaca campus. I think Ithaca campus is similar to pretty similar to like Cornell Tech campus. We're pretty back up to full speed at this moment. But before that, technically, we run into a lot of challenges from the pandemic because there are limitations on doing the using the hardware in the lab, and also there are limitations to do human subject study. So we have to be creative. How to recruit participants was definitely a big challenge. But at this moment, it seems like most parts have been back to normal, at least on Ithaca campus. I can see people flowing around in the department. I just sometimes I don't feel COVID is here anymore based on what I see in the department, which I know is not true, but yeah, that's kind of fair.
Yeah. We're not supposed to eat or offer food to participants, for example, that there's a thing. Yeah.
So
Drew asked.
Yeah, I can answer that.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, and so I think there is not, I know many department and many university HCI came from CS because well, there is a computer part in it, so it was a natural location to start with. From historical reason, it was not necessarily the best solution for Cornell, because Cornell is the focus is more on theory. And so it was at the time when they decided to have an HCI department, they decided that it would be much better to have a sister department, which is information science created, so that people who do HCI there will be less tension between the kind of purely theoretical CS and HCI. So instead, we are kind of probably one of the most technical IS department in the country because our root is in CS. It's just that we thought that it would be better to have a new entity. But in fact, we are very close, as some of you may know, we are in the same building. And it is sometimes difficult to figure out who is in CS and who is in AS because many of the faculty have both affiliation.
The other thing I would add as well is, like, if we are thinking about the differences, right? So CS has a very kind of CS focused kind of core requirements and curriculum as PhD, and also so IS there is you can do the same level of technical work, but in terms of the core kind of courses, there's a little bit more breadth in terms of looking at societal impact, the behavioral side of things, and as well you can bring that into your thesis, right? So that can be as kind of significant or kind of minor part of your thesis as you want to be. So there is more flexibility there in kind of taking the core technical and adding some of the kind of societal impact and behavioral side of things as you would want based on your interest. And I think oh, there was a hand raised.
Yeah, that's my hand up. You kind of answered my question as we went, so I didn't put it up, but I can definitely follow up and ask, so, you know, coming from an HCI background, I know that there are a lot of portions where you kind of have to like study and educate yourself, like we talked at the start of the session. I just wanted to know what kind of support does the faculty offer, in the sense, are we allowed to like kind of take some time off and just, you know, study again and come back with new skills, or are we supposed to kind of just work with what we have? I don't know if my question is clear, but I hope that makes sense.
Do you mean by studying like taking courses, or studying like?
But yes, courses as well as like extension of, you know, I need to know Python for some projects, so I need to take some time off and kind of catch up on that. Does the faculty offer support in that way, or is it a more of like I have to go and take courses for it?
Oh, okay. So I mean, I think maybe the thing that we're a little thrown by is the word "take time off," because you get paid to learn things during your PhD, and if there's a course, I mean, I think that's great. That's a great way to learn something. In general, if you need to know a lot about a specific area, a course does a good job of kind of covering that faster than you can learn that yourself or with more structure. But there are definitely moments where you only need things that are covered in 1 week of a course, and then you need like 5 things further in that area in a normal course would move on. So normally during the course of your PhD, you get to the point that you are at the end of what they have established courses on, and you have to learn a lot about something new. And of course, that is the whole job of researchers, to come up to speed on that, and you get paid for doing that research.
Okay, yeah, that answers my question. Thank you.
Ian? Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on Drew's question a little bit. We were talking about this like comparison between IS and CS, and I'm curious, like, how does that impact outcomes in programs? Like, I think CS program, like more traditional CS programs, you go to a CS program, and if you want to become a computer science professor, it's a more linear path, I imagine, or it's more straightforward. How does that change with IS, or how do you think about that? I'm just curious, or other outcomes as well, obviously.
I can say, oh, go ahead.
Sorry,
I think kind of the IS, like CS PhDs often go for CS faculty job. IS faculty go to CS faculty job and other departments as well, right? So I think both myself, like Francois, and like I've had students who have gone and become an IS has going to CS departments, right? But that's not the only department they'll go to. So if that's kind of part of your background, we've seen students go there. Cheng, sorry, I interrupted.
No problem. So yeah, my answer is very similar to Tanzim. Basically, I want to use Tanzim and Francois student as example. Like their students go to different department, and many of them go to CS department. I think a lot of times where you end up with, if you go to academia, which department end up with actually depends on how that university place their research into department. Some of the department university put their like for example, interdisciplinary research like Ubicomp into CS. Then the student likely end up in that department. So it's really not about whether you're CS major or IS major. It depends on what your research is and which university you're looking for and which department they're looking to here in that area. So I think the research area actually matters more than just yes, because I know where the university places research area in their department. Like François said, in Cornell, a place interdisciplinary research like accelerated research in the S department.
Thank you. Gotcha.
I can just jump in since no one's asking questions. I know Francois from when he was finishing his PhD and I was starting one, so I can say that like when we graduated, HCI wasn't a thing that CS departments hired for. It was a really strange thing to be doing. And now that's not the case. So CS departments everywhere are growing a lot. HCI is an area that any CS department knows that they should have, or it should be somewhere on the campus. And so I think you have to keep in mind that anyone who's entering now graduates 4 or 5 years from now. I don't see that trend going away. So I think if there's places that are more conservative now and would prefer a more traditional version of a CS person, like I think that's probably not going to be the case by the time you graduate.
I would also add on to that. And I think in the past, even just in the past like 3 years, we see a lot of integration in like critical design, activism, law and policy entering the conversation of HCI, entering like human-centered AI. And in that sense, that at least for my lab, for my students, it worked really well when they are in a department where there's also law faculties, where there's like privacy and policy experts where they can take classes, but also can go to, machine learning experts, machine learning faculties if they have technical questions. So I think that's also a trend that's not going to go away, not in 5 years, I think. So that's another thing I think worth considering.
Yeah, kind of related, and also I think a question maybe in the initial session is I was wondering if you all can talk about any ongoing relationships either with industry or with local communities, or even like across like departments within or across focuses in IS that are happening in your research.
There's so many. I'm sure every faculty here has so many. I'll just throw out a few. So give you industry example. We actually just received a gift from industry. It was like a real estate development company who's interested in using NLP, using chatbots in improving like citizen participation in urban development. So that's a collaboration with industry, i.e. a real estate company, and also with Technion, it's like a leading university in Israel. So we're doing like international sort of research in that sense, and that's quite, everyone claims their research is interdisciplinary, but I think that's quite interdisciplinary in that project. I also do a bit of research with our medical school. So, I mean, Tenzin can speak too much more about that. So we have like machine learning faculties in the medical school who specializes in clinical machine learning. And then we also work very closely with machine learning faculties in machine learning department. So there are many projects in those areas, and collaboration has been always been easy. So I'm sure we can, every faculty here can give many examples. But.
I can talk also a little bit like, yeah, I think many of us have strong collaboration working in health with while and at least in New York City, other hospitals as well, right? So there is a big kind of network of hospitals, and I think multiple ways of faculty are engaging, right? There is a whole program around public interest tech where you asked about community engagement. There is community engagement with local communities that include like older adults. There's been kind of project in Roosevelt Island community with older adults that Professor Deborah Estrin has been driving. And then there is a work that's like Nikki Dell, Professor and Tom Riston drive in terms of intimate partner violence that worked with the mayor's office. And it's like there is a tech clinic. What is it called, Wendy? Like the tech clinic?
I don't know what the name is.
There is
Yeah,
like
but-
now it's the program that's run out of the mayor's office that came out of the work. There is collaborations also with home health aides unions that do a lot of in-home kind of healthcare. Again, I've kind of also personally been involved in like doing a startup that is related to kind of mental health, which I kind of took and was involved in and running for 4 years, and then like it got like had like professional, more like business oriented kind of CEO that is taking and growing it further. So Wendy, I think, has a lot of also collaboration with various car industries. So it's as Kian said, that there's maybe too many. We can probably use up all our time talking about that.
Yeah, I have collaboration also with people in CS in graphics and fabrication there. And I have also led some effort for the local community. So for example, some of the class we are teaching, the project presentation are in our local museum. And I mean, with COVID, we put a pause on that, but of course, hopefully we'll be able to resume. And the museum is, in fact, the local museum is very nice because it gives us, you know, when you do interactive exhibit, they are very well versed into setting a proposal and working with us so that we can have a direct outreach. I should also say that there is, in fact, a branch of Cornell which only focus is on delivering grant for outreach, so that you can have a proposal, and then they give you some money to support transferring your research into a direct contact with the local community. And it's quite broad because, as I don't know if you know, but Cornell is both a private school and a public school. And part of the public segment of Cornell is managing the 4-H program, which is a kind of an outreach, which is in all county of New York State, so that you can have a great impact by interacting with them.
Yeah, Tenzi mentioned, you know, we're doing research right now with Nissan and Toyota as sponsors. We have some things where instead of having a sponsorship model, we have a collaborator model with like GM, for example, the thing that Chen and I were working on. GM basically helped us write the grant that we went to the federal government for funding on. And then some of the things that we're doing are like with other parts of Cornell. So Cornell has this digital agriculture initiative, and part of the thing that is coming out of like on the public side of Cornell, I basically have all these campuses that are basically doing outreach to farmers to make sure they have kind of scientific understanding of how to do farm work. And so we're working with Louis Longchamp, who's an agronomist with Cornell, and Diane Bailey, who's in communications, and doing this thing to study how farmers collect data and how they use that data and manage that data. And so that's been really fun. Like my PhD student, Natalie Friedman, has like selfie pictures of herself with cows when she like went to farms to interview people about their data needs. It's like, you know, we will go from that to doing factory interviews and then come in and like prototype some machines. So it's a good job. It's fun.
Yeah, my next meeting is actually like with sustainability folks, and we're looking at soil and monitoring soil quality and food quality that's actually like grown in it. And yeah, my next meeting is actually like with the farmers to see whether we can put a sensor box there, get measurements to the cloud, and analyze how to actually improve productivity and what are the learnings we can have from the data and the environmental impacts as well in the New York City. So yeah, so a couple of my students are actually like working with soil these days.
Question to faculties. Are you open to co-advise with faculty who focus more on qualitative research? I feel like we can say everyone is yes, unless you want to. A lot of us really work in mixed methods. I think a lot of us do both qualitative and quantitative, so this is really not a concern at all.
Without saying anything bad about other departments, like IS at Cornell is a place where everyone likes each other a lot and are really excited for every opportunity to do something together. So I don't know if you can tell that we are excited just to be in a call with each other, but we are. And then, you know, like when someone asks to co-advise, it's like, yeah, you know, exciting.
Yeah, it's probably one of the most collegial departments I've seen. I think there is no, well, we are a builder or we are qualitative. I think we understand that as a builder, you need qualitative people to help you gather the data and validate your design, and the other way work as well, which is often people need hardware to conduct maybe an exploration or to try to see how people will react to it. So I think we are trying to be as collaborative as we can.
And I think one of the great things about IS also is that we don't impose anything, right? Like we don't like everybody has to have this mix of things, right? Whatever works best with your research and there is a lot of like flexibility to support kind of your research, and with the department, our students take us in new directions as well. And what IS is grows with what your thesis is